Well, the U.S. and China, two world powers with a very shaky relationship. A study by the Brookings Institution shows that as China's influence grows, they see the U.S. as a declining power. But they also believe that the U.S. will do anything in its power to make sure that it stays on top. Now, this comes as the U.S. is shifting their geopolitical focus to the Asia-Pacific region. And just yesterday, 200 U.S. Marines arrived in Darwin, Australia. They are the first of thousands expected to arrive. Now, this is the latest move by the U.S. military to amp up its presence in the region. And China has some concerns with the growing U.S. presence nearby. So, as tension rises, what does the future hold for U.S.-China relations? To talk more about this, Raymond Latta, political economist, joins us now. Welcome, Raymond. So we are seeing that there are suspicions on both sides, but is there one side that seems to be more suspicious?
You know, I don't think it's a question of suspiciousness or distrust, although those are real phenomena, or who distrusts whom more. What's really going on is that there are growing geopolitical tensions between the United States and China. And this is taking place against a backdrop of a profound global economic crisis. That's really what's setting the stage for this. You see over the last 2 decades a decline of the U.S. share of world production, the dollar, its role in international currency markets and its role in the international economy has eroded. And you see the rise of China, not as a socialist society, but as a capitalist power. Since the death of Mao Zedong, China has been a capitalist society. And China's economic clout has grown. It is now the second largest economy in the world. It's the second largest manufacturing exporter. And the renminbi, the Chinese currency, is playing an increasingly important role in the world economy. So there is a shift in relative economic might in the world. The U.S. is still the dominant power, but China's rise is a profound and shaping feature of global geoeconomics. And this now is leading to intensifying geoeconomic tensions between these two powers.
And as well, we are seeing a shift, a military response to this, the U.S. shifting their military might to the Asia-Pacific region. And it's believed it's because they want to amp up presence near China.
Well, I think, again, against the backdrop that I'm setting forth here, yes, this is absolutely true. If you look at the January 12 Pentagon strategy review that was issued in January of this year, it speaks of, quote, a rebalancing of U.S. military assets towards Asia, and it singles out China. This is a reflection of the fact, as I said, of the growing rivalry, economic and geopolitical, between these two powers. And the U.S. imperialism is seeking to compensate for its declining economic strength, by using its military advantage. And what's happening now, as you kind of touched on in the opening to this segment, is very, very significant. The U.S. has expanded its long-term presence, military presence in Asia, for the first time since the end of the war in Vietnam. That is, setting up this base in Australia. The U.S. is seeking to strengthen its partnerships and alliances in East Asia. And it is waging what the Wall Street Journal called a few months ago a full court press against China. That is, it's trying to encircle China and tighten that encirclement economically, militarily, and diplomatically. It's insinuating itself into territorial disputes in the South China Seas. And it is, as I said, trying to reassert its hegemonic position in Asia. And China, in turn, is responding to that. But both of these powers are actually seeking to expand their presence and their influence. The U.S. is reasserting its dominant presence, and China is, as a capitalist power in transition to an imperialist power, is expanding its commercial influence, is breaking out into Africa, into Central Asia. Its relative demand for raw materials is greater now than ever before. And this is, again, part of this backdrop, and that rivalry is not in the interest of the people of the world.
So what you're saying is that the U.S., as they kind of surround China in a way, with these new bases that we're seeing pop up in the region, that China is also responding to this.
Yeah, as I said, both of these, the U.S. is the dominant imperialist power in the world, and it is responsible for more suffering and more death and destruction than any power since the end of World War II. And of course, it should be very galling and upsetting to anyone of decency and justice when the U.S. talks about reasserting its strength in Asia. This is where the U.S. waged its war in Vietnam for 10 years and was responsible for the deaths of 2 to 3 million people, the war in Korea. The U.S. was responsible, the CIA was complicit in the deaths of 500,000 people in Indonesia in 1965. So when the U.S. talks about, reasserting or rebalancing or reorienting towards Asia, there is a proven record there that is one of oppression and horror. And China, in turn, is, as I said, as a capitalist power in transition to an imperial power, is engaged in a process of expansion, as I said, economically and militarily. China is stepping up and ramping up its, military spending. The budget in 2012 in China will now be over $100 billion, which makes China the second largest military spender in the world. Of course, this is only 1/7 of U.S. military expenditure.
All right, we have just a very little amount of time left, but we are seeing these tensions rising. Where could this lead ultimately? 10, 15 years? Where is this heading?
Well, I think we see some of the signs and seeds of this right now. This intensifying rivalry could lead to military conflict. I'm not here to make any predictions, but this is, in fact, entirely conceivable. So, one, as I said, there is the danger. East Asia is a flashpoint or trigger point of military conflict. And two,
all right.
I think we have
Raymond, we are just simply out of time, but thank you very much. Appreciate you coming on the show. That was Raymond Latta. Well, starting off this hour, Australia is rolling out the red carpet for 200 U.S. Marines that arrived today. They are the first of the 2,500 soldiers expected in Darwin. The troops will be rotating in and out of the region every 6 months or so as part of an agreement by President Obama and Prime Minister Julia Gillard back in November. It's the latest move by the U.S. military to amp up its presence in the region and a major shift on the global geopolitical chessboard. The U.S., of course, has no issues with Australia. President Obama even went as far as to call the country one of America's closest allies. This does, however, demonstrate an ever-increasing American interest in the Pacific, but many are questioning the exact motives behind the move, and none are more critical than China. Dr. Pak Nung Wan explains why China is concerned about the developments.
I think the situation now has already caught the attention of the Chinese Communist Party in the past 3 months. As far as I have observed some signs of discussion and debate within the Chinese government. The Chinese government has started to gain some consensus, a perception that the U.S. and China relations is being positioned in a zero-sum game. Now, in this regard, it will have some very important implications of the change of Chinese foreign policy after Mr. Xi Jinping is going to step up as the president of China. Now, what would it be? I think is one of the possibilities is for the Chinese government for the future, apart from continue its resource-focused diplomacy and economic-oriented diplomatic and activities in the overseas, the Chinese government is going to consider to take a more assertive and more active position to try to influence the internal politics of other countries, number one. Number two, I think it's also for the Chinese government to consider to increase and to consider to increase its military presence in order to protect the kind of national interest that it has overseas.
So as you heard, China is certainly concerned over today's developments, and this comes as China itself looks to increase its presence in various parts of the Middle East. Currently, the country has its sights set on Pakistan. China already has a port in Gwadar that was built back in 2005. Last year, Pakistan asked China to build a naval base there and maintain a regular presence at the port. Now, China has denied the possibility of a naval base there, but this statement hasn't subdued fears from the U.S. and India, and the strategic importance of this port cannot be underestimated. It is quite close to the Strait of Hormuz, which is where 1/5 of the world's oil travels through, and it was the scene of a tense standoff between American and Iranian naval forces months ago after President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad threatened to shut the waterway down. And today's developments, along with China's interest in the region, shows how the chess pieces of these two global powers are slowly gravitating toward one another. We will continue to follow this story as it expands.